Hello, you're watching Property Question Time, the show where you get to put your queries, your questions, your conundrums to our trio of expert panelists. My name's Gemma Forte, but let's meet who's going to be answering all your questions today. First up, we have Paul Mahoney, the MD of Nova Financial. And then we have Mary-Anne Bowring, who is the founding director of the Ringley Group. And last but not least, we have Tomer Aboody, who is the MD of MT Finance. Welcome, one and all. Okay, Paul, I'm going to kick off with you because we've got so many questions. So here's the first one. My partner and I are unmarried and bought a house a few years together, living in sin. We're now looking to, so old-fashioned, we're now looking to move, but our plan was always to buy a second property and rent out our first. With the new rules on stamp duty, we wonder if we could transfer the first property so that it was just owned by one of us and then buy the new house in the other name so that we each own a property. Would there be any stamp duty owed due to the change in ownership on the first property?
Okay.
So that could be not being married, could be a massive advantage to individuals.
It could be a massive advantage, but the disadvantage is the fact that they're not married. There likely would be stamp duty payable on the transfer of ownership.
Okay.
It's obviously important to seek tax advice there, but if they were married, they'd likely be able to avoid that. The fact that they're not, there would likely be stamp duty payable.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And of course there'd be costs involved as well, legal costs and things involved in that. There probably wouldn't be any capital gains tax because it's their primary place of residence. Another option to kind of throw in the mix there, which is a sort of neat little trick given the recent stamp duty premium introduction, is if they really want to keep that property, they could, and depending on the value of the new property they're buying, they could transfer the current one that they own into a limited company that they owned. That could potentially save them money on stamp duty perhaps. It's worth assessing all options really.
Okay.
Sitting down with someone, going through what all the options are, all the figures, and then they can balance that against what they want to do personally.
So just obviously trying to think out the box and make it the best possible deal for them. Okay, thank you. Hope that's helped. Now, Mary-Anne, somebody here is just saying, is there a legal basis for a right to light that may be blocked by adjacent trees?
Right to light in terms of buildings, for sure, yes. Right to light in terms of trees, no law that I'm aware of. If you can imagine every large council tree, I'm sure it would bankrupt the council if a right to light for trees was suddenly brought in. Generally it's based on planning law, and planning law would suggest that overlooking should be resisted, and there's often an 18-metre rule between some parts of buildings or direct windows. Other than that, a right to light will be based on a daylight study, which will depend on where the sun is at different parts of the day to meet certain criteria as to how much light you should have. In simple terms, you draw a 45-degree line from your window and look at the sun path. But in terms of trees, no, I'm not aware of any. You do have the right to cut down the branches that overhang your land, and that might be enough to deal with it.
Yeah.
And the landowner where the tree sits on has a duty to make sure that tree doesn't damage your property. So they may well need to pollard it to try to restrict the root growth from affecting your structure.
Okay,
So,
all right, very thorough answer there. So if, for just hypothetically, you move into a place and then trees in somebody else's garden are really making things pretty dark, would a first point of action be just to go knock politely on that neighbour's door and say,
yeah, I mean, I'm a firm believer that if you bring someone into your property and show them the problem, and it wouldn't make any difference to them because it's your side of the tree, then hopefully they would share your point of view to a certain degree and possibly do something about it. But if it's overhanging your side, then you can cut that anyway.
Right, okay.
So it depends. But if it was taller in their land, and there are some horrible court cases about those very fast growing fir trees that kind of change a landscape by growing.
Yeah, I think it happened to one of my old bosses. I think that's what I'm thinking about. And he was just like, oh, all my light's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was even saying he'd be prepared to pay for the tree to be trimmed down or whatever. But yeah, tricky. They do grow fast, those ones. Okay, Tomer, so let's go to you now. This person says, I'm trying to get a mortgage on the house that I bought using a bridging loan. The mainstream lenders say they can't provide a mortgage to cover a bridging loan. Why?
It's a bit of a confusing one, actually.
You've never come across that
No,
before?
never. I've never heard of something as like that at all. I mean, typically, a lot of borrowers that we deal with, or in the bridging space, will take a bridging loan, and a lot of the time will exit with a refinance from a bank, mainstream lender, your high street lender. I've never come across a situation where a lender refused to take out a bridging lender. I mean, that's something very unique. I think it's worthwhile definitely discussing this with a financial advisor or doing a bit more research on this through, there's so many, means out there nowadays with the internet. But that's something which completely is unique. I've never heard of something similar to that at all.
Okay, so it sounds so there might be more to the story that perhaps we haven't
Correct.
got.
Yeah, I don't think from that particular question, the way it's asked, I don't think that gives us a whole story. If it does, it's a very unique one.
Okay.
Might be worth looking at other factors. For example, if they haven't had the bridging loan for more than 6 months, that's a reason that some high street lenders won't do it. They want you to have owned the property for more than 6 months before you then exit out or remortgage, if you like.
Right.
Or it might be something to do with the property. I think maybe they might be confused about the bridging loan being the reason. Perhaps there's another reason.
Okay, all right, fair enough, thank you. Okay, has anybody got a golden nugget for me? This is what we do on this show. We get a golden nugget from each expert, and it's just lovely, piece of wisdom.
Got a possible warning for landlords.
Okay.
Just something to be aware of in April 2018.
Right.
That the government's proposed to change the minimum energy performance certificate rating that you can rent your property to E. So that means it would become illegal to rent a property with a certificate of F or G.
Right.
However, don't rush to make huge energy improvements, because the government's also recalibrating the scale by which they calculate the rating.
Okay.
But if you've got a solid brick building with single glazed windows, you may need to be thinking about the types of energy improvements that you could make in the property, because potentially there's a threat waiting for us in April.
Okay, yes, so if that comes in, which you think is looking likely, and for obvious reasons, I guess they're good reasons just to make everybody green in the environment, etc. But that would probably affect a lot of properties, wouldn't it?
It'll affect a lot of the older stock of properties for sure. But there are it's not just all about the bricks and the windows.
Right.
It is about the appliances within the property, the efficiency of your boiler.
Okay.
So there's a holistic view that needs to be taken.
Yeah.
But certainly a landlord with a property rated F or G needs to be thinking about it now.
Yes.
Loft insulation's another simple one. That's not expensive and can probably be installed in a couple of hours after buying a roll from B&Q.
Yeah.
So you need to start thinking. There are going to possibly be some changes to the way it's calculated, which hopefully will be in your favour. But ultimately the government's committed to huge energy reduction targets, with the world leaders, as it were.
Yeah.
And landlords are soft prey to go and get some improvements from.
Yeah, well, that's good. And actually, especially with appliances actually as well, because obviously, as we know now, it can be very dangerous to have old appliances. And I found once when I was renting, the fridge freezer genuinely broke. It was about 7,000 years old, the first one that was ever made. And, I just lost a whole load of groceries. And I remember she replaced it, and it came, and the fridge she'd replaced with was literally the cheapest fridge you could get on the market. And I remember thinking, she owns that. It's like, anyway, yes, it's good.
Well, look for A-grade appliances, but with appliances even more scary is on fridges particularly, because they're the largest cause of fire.
Yeah.
Ones with a plastic back will overcome the room with smoke and fumes in less than a few minutes, whereas ones with a metal back will burn themselves out.
Right, okay, and I'd imagine in light of recent circumstances, that might be legislation that changes again.
One would hope so, because why would one sell a plastic back fridge that's going to cause almost definite, definite smoke inhalation problems?
Just stop making them.
Well, I don't understand it, but that's the world we live in.
And as for insulation, you're right, because I know that they've changed the boundaries, because I had a loft done recently, and there is so much insulation on there. You literally don't need a radiator in the winter. It's extraordinary. Half the house is insulation. It's which is a good thing, obviously.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you very much for that. Anybody want to pitch in on that?
Let the experts speak about it.
Let the experts speak about it, exactly. Okay, so we've had one golden nugget, but if you join us for part 2 of Property Question Time, we're going to have 2 more and more questions as well. So don't move a muscle, and we'll be back after this short break. Welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time with me, Gemma Forte, and my guests, Paul Mahoney, Mary-Anne Bowring and Tomer Aboody. So without further ado, I'm going to extract another golden nugget. Gentlemen, it's your turn. So Tomer, have you got one for me, please?
Yeah, I think a lot of finance available nowadays on the bridging finance market is on second charges, which if used for business purposes, people can borrow funds either on their home or a second charge against their buy-to-lets in order to release equity to be able to invest into their business, which has helped recently quite a lot of SMEs, within the market. We see a big increase in that recently past year or so. So I think if you have good equity within your buy-to-let property or your current home, I think that's kind of a viable way to be able to raise funding. Obviously, I think you always have to go speak to an advisor with regards to that, but there is a lot of options out there to be able to invest money into your business currently, or starting off a new business on a second charge basis, which are available up to 2 years, 3 years sometimes.
Excellent, thank you for that. Right, Paul, we've got a question for you. This person says, I am married and I am a first-time buyer looking to buy my first property. I will be contributing 100% to the deposit amount as my spouse has been in the UK for less than a year and doesn't have any savings. And the mortgage will be fully based on my finances alone. However, when I look to remortgage in 2 years' time, her finances will have improved. Can someone advise me if there's any advantage or disadvantage of me buying the property jointly or in sole name? We're going to start some maritals here.
Yeah. My understanding is that from asset protection perspective, there's not much difference really, given they're married, unless there's other arrangements in place. From a mortgage perspective, potentially having the wife involved could be useful in the future. For example, if the value of the property were to increase, or even if the male partner of the couple were to lose his job or something, having the wife's income could be quite useful.
Yeah.
Given that residential mortgages are quite closely based upon a multiple of income.
Yeah.
So, and generally it's sort of 4 to 5 times would be the maximum you can borrow.
Yeah.
So having the two involved could be quite useful in the future.
Down the line, yeah.
Whether it be borrowing what you currently owe or whether it be wanting to remortgage and release some equity in the future. So that's one potential benefit of the wife being involved. I suppose the rest is kind of personal considerations, really. I'd prefer just to talk about the financial side of things.
I think it's for the best, isn't it? We don't want to start going, do you love her? Are you going to be together? Is she a keeper? Because then it just gets a bit personal, doesn't it? Yeah, so that sounds like good advice. But that is a good point. You never know how your situation might change. And, she may end up being the breadwinner, or you might want to remortgage. And then, yeah, so that's a good consideration.
I think that's an important consideration with all financial advice, investment advice, is advisors can really only advise on the financial side of things. There's always a personal side to that. There's always something that you might want to do or a personal preference, and making sure that you're balancing those two things is important.
Yes. Okay. Excellent. Thank you very much. So, Mary-Anne, this person says, we've got 2 blocks on our estate, and the leases provide that we collect service charges as a whole, not block by block. At a previous AGM, it was minuted that each block should have its own reserve towards its own repairs. And this has been the convention since, but now this is being objected to by some. And we need to basically understand how sound our decision was. So this sounds like a lot of people. So it's an estate, 2 blocks. There's obviously a lot of opinions and might have got a bit heated at the old AGM.
Tricky question, because you're trying to use 2 different parts of legislation to compete against each other.
Okay.
One is landlord and tenant legislation, which affects your lease. The other is company legislation, which affects your company.
Okay.
The most important question to find out first is, are the objectors members of the company? Because if it was a freehold company, possibly, I don't know, 50 or 60% bought into the freehold and the other people didn't. And if they're not actually a member of the freehold company, it doesn't matter what resolution you pass, you can't force it upon them. Generally speaking, the tribunal is a due restriction for service charge, and if two parties haven't agreed to change their lease, which is a contract, by mutual agreement, then the contract still stands as it was. So the question suggests that originally the contract or the lease said that everybody pays into the same reserve fund. There'll be reasons for that. If the buildings are similar, built around the same time, it's to try to average out what money will be available to spend at whatever time. If there is law, however, the case law, the Moorshed Mansions case does say that if there isn't a reserve fund or the lease is defunct, you could actually collect reserve fund using your company in lieu of the lease. I'm not sure whether it actually overrides the lease, but as a service charge payer, if they're demanding service charge from you, then the governing legislation is your lease. And if your lease says one fund, then two funds is null and void and you wouldn't have to pay. However, if they're demanding members' contributions from you or lien under the Companies Act, then that is not a demand that is anything to do with your lease. That is a voluntary, it's a call on the members of that company. So you've got to look very closely at how they're demanding what they're demanding, because it may be fundamentally flawed, or if it's not had proper legal advice before they've structured what they're doing, it's pretty certain that they'll be falling foul of doing it correctly.
And what strikes me is every time we ask you a question, it's like you've obviously had cases similar and come across all these different types of situations in your work.
Well, I'm always sad that they don't send solicitors to property management school before they let them draft leases. Because whatever's written is fine and a fee for them, but we get to live with the idiosyncrasies for the next 99 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, I really hope that helps. Sounds like a bit of a complicated one, doesn't it? And
you need more paperwork to analyse before you're going to get a straight answer.
Yeah. And they're going to have to pay for that advice as well. So it's
they need to get proper advice, yeah.
And you can just imagine all the people objecting. So, Tomer, one for you. This person says, I'm in the process of downsizing. I don't have cash available to put down as a deposit on my new home as it's all tied up in my current property. I've been told that banks no longer provide bridging loans to help with deposits. Can anyone advise a reasonably cheap alternative to banks to help?
This is, again, I think there's always availability of advice through financial advisors of how you can be able to work with that. There are a lot of the alternative lenders out there in the alternative lender space and challenger banks who work quite differently to the way the mainstream lenders work. So they've got different sets of criteria and different abilities to assist where others might not be able to. I'm not saying in this particular situation that that's the case, but it sounds like a scenario where hopefully there will be a lender out there able to assist you with regards to being able to purchase a new property that you're looking to buy. Once again, get advice, go speak to a financial advisor who might direct you in the right direction, because it doesn't sound like it should be just a full stop no to your circumstances on that side. But interesting to hear that, because I think if you're looking to be able to buy another property, and if you have no equity against your current, or if your equity is all tied up in your current assets, it should be able to be a way of being able to raise money against that.
And how would somebody make sure that, is there something to look for to make sure a firm is really legitimate?
I think in all circumstances in any industry, you're going to have some bodies which are going to be able to manage that. So before you approach, once again, go through a financial advisor who then advise you. But even then, you can double check and triple checks. Speak to the bodies who are their members of. See if there's been any complaints. Do some research on the internet. Look about any comments people have had against them. A lot of lenders out there will have, comments about them and feedback from previous clients and brokers. And if there's been, some of them will be great comments, some of them will be bad. And I think it's a good mixture to actually to see. But have a look at that, do some research, because yes, of course, there will be some unfortunate rogue people out there. But on the whole, I think they're very much institutional, they play, they work well and they work to the system. But definitely worthwhile doing the research. But there are so many bodies and associations out there that lenders should be members of. And you can ask the bodies themselves whether it's advised to go to any particular lender and who can help you.
All right, okay, thank you very much.
On that particular question, I think perhaps it might be the terminology that they're using that is getting rejected.
Right.
For example, going to a high street lender and asking for a bridging loan, the likely response is we don't do those. But that doesn't mean that they can't provide something that provides the same benefit or the same utility.
Right, does the same job, yeah.
Exactly. They're looking to release equity to allow them to buy elsewhere, which the terminology for that is generally bridging. But just a standard residential mortgage would allow them to do that.
Okay.
Release, taking if it's a debt-free property, I don't know what they said, but even if it's not, whether it's got a mortgage or not, taking a mortgage for slightly more, remortgaging that, taking the equity out and using that's one way they could potentially fulfill what they want to do. Of course, bridging is the secondary option, and to do that, they need to go to a bridging lender.
So it might just be need to explain their situation and then say, what could you do for me?
Yeah, and I think that's often the case with high street lenders. It's often a bit of a tick box exercise.
Yeah, okay.
A lot of people get too. I think a lot of people are very much. We've said before. I think if it's you've been using the same bank for many years, or you see them on your high street, you believe they're going to be the best guys or people to advise you. There are so many options out there, and it's about how what Paul was saying. It's how you actually describe the situation and describe your circumstances, and then maybe be able to advise you differently.
Sorry, I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but bank managers aren't what bank managers used to be.
No.
A bank manager used to be able to make a call on things.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily the case anymore, especially the high street lenders.
Yeah.
And often, therefore, you're talking with somebody who's just looking at a computer screen and sort of ticking boxes. So if you answer the wrong thing, you're likely to get the wrong answer.
Yeah.
Again, I suppose that reverts back to the value of advice, because if they actually explain what they need, then an advisor will be able to say, well, actually, this is a more suitable type of product for you to give you that outcome.
And the advisor can speak to the lender.
Yeah.
The advisor has a relationship with the lender, they can speak to them. This is actually the circumstances of the case, of a certain client. Can we work with this? Is there anything available to be able to assist them? So.
Okay. All right, great advice there. Thank you so much. And Paul, a nugget from you, sir, to finish off with.
Yeah. When it comes to investing in property or purchasing buy-to-let, I think it's very important to determine what type of investor you are. Whether you're a landlord or whether you are actually an investor. And I'd say the difference between those two things are whether you're quite proactive or whether you're passive.
Okay.
Most of our clients tend to be passive, and that's people who are busy. They've got extra funds, or they want to provide for retirement. They don't necessarily want to be too hands-on, and therefore that's really no different to investing in anything else. It might be shares or otherwise. That's the way it should be looked at, solely based on the fundamentals. And property just so happens to be the vehicle for doing it. The other side of that is, if you're looking to renovate or develop, or you're a full-time landlord, well, that's a job. That is a business in itself.
Yeah.
It's completely different. So understanding the difference between those two things, and therefore, I suppose, from there, sort of reverse engineering it to determine what the best purchases might be for you, how you can achieve your goals through the right strategy. Because they are two very different avenues.
Yes. Okay. Excellent. And totally true. As someone who managed a renovation and was working at the same time, it's full time.
Yeah.
Just about recovered. Thank you so much. It's been full of information. I hope you've enjoyed it, and you've been watching Paul Mahoney, Mary-Anne Bowring and Tomer Aboody. And if you've got any questions that you'd like answered by an expert panel, then please get them to us. info@property-tv.co.uk is the email, or you can have a look at the website, which is also property-tv.co.uk. I'm Gemma Forte. Thank you for watching.